I felt that it was time for someone to stop Mr. Ford and his Dearborn Independent. I knew in advance what he would do to me. I knew that if any of us would dare to fight him, he would tear him to pieces with bitter personal attacks. I knew he'd rake through my life. But I was willing to face all that. So I decided to sue Henry Ford.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey. In 1927, Billy Rose and Dave Stamper wrote a comedic song, Since Henry Ford Apologized to Me, mocking the auto tycoon's apology for publishing anti-Semitic literature.
I was sad and I was blue, but now I'm just as good as you, since Henry Ford apologized to me.
That's why you threw away your little Chevrolet and bought yourself a Ford coupe.
The events preceding that song are explored in a fascinating new documentary.
We're thrilled to talk with director Gaylen Ross and producer Carol King, whose new documentary is Sapiro v. Ford, the Jew who sued Henry Ford. Gaylen and Carol, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Henry Ford's anti-Semitism isn't a secret, but the extent of his vitriol has largely been forgotten. Could you take us through some of that?
I grew up in Detroit, and Henry Ford was iconic in Detroit and in Michigan, and everybody held him in such esteem. But the Jewish community knew about his anti-Semitism. I didn't. I grew up on the east side of Detroit. It was not populated with Jews at all. And I learned about it as an adult. And I was really fascinated by what I learned, because so many people that I knew didn't really take it seriously. They thought it was just a quirk. You know, Henry Ford's just sort of, this is like a blind spot for him or whatever it was. And as I became familiar with what he did, the enormity of his anti-Semitism, the real damage that was done by him became abundantly clear. And the more I learned, the more I thought, we have to tell people, people need to know this. People need to know this, because he is still regarded as a towering figure, especially around the automobile. I mean, you have to acknowledge that he really made a contribution. But the venom and the vitriol of his anti-Semitism really needed to be exposed to a wider audience.
Well, I think, certainly among the Jewish community, I mean, not just a community, but historically, I think people knew. I mean, many people knew about Henry Ford and his anti-Semitism. I don't know individually how people realized it. But that the extent of it, but it was sort of part of a historic piece in American history. But then the reality of what happened and how this lawsuit happened was completely unknown, and that I think is really what was really very difficult to comprehend. That Aaron Sapiro, who challenged Ford, this impoverished, born an impoverished person in San Francisco, raised in an orphanage, and certainly had no reason to be experiencing the world that Henry Ford experienced as the second most wealthy American and the most important industrialist in America, that he challenged him, and that part of the story was completely erased. I think, and even among lawyers who teach anti-Semitism in the law, they know about Henry Ford and they know about what he did, but they don't know about Aaron Sapiro. And then the lawsuit is sort of just brushed over perhaps because there wasn't a verdict. It was mistrial at the end, but it did not become an historic trial in that way. It did in the 1920s, but it didn't live on to this day.
You're reminding me that my father was raised in Detroit as well. And when I was growing up, Ford was just a bad word in my house. Like, we would never want to get a Ford. You know, the Ford brand was kind of tarnished for us. And then I remember when I was younger, they played an uninterrupted, no commercial version of Schindler's List on network television, and it was sponsored by Ford. I felt like that was some kind of another apology in its own way.
Well, it wasn't sponsored by Henry Ford. It was sponsored by the Ford Foundation. I think that they had done their mea culpas. I mean, essentially, not only in sponsoring Schindler's List, but a lot of other foundations. And that anti-Semitism of Henry Ford ended with Henry, I think.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe.
As you mentioned, the film's hero, Aaron Sapiro, was raised in a San Francisco orphanage. He later became a leading activist and lawyer for the farmers' movement of the 1920s. How did his background shape his activism?
Well, I think it's pretty clear when you grow up in those circumstances. He was very sensitive to the trials that farmers were facing. He knew, as he says in the film, when his father died, there was 20 cents in the house, and there were 7 children. So he was deprived, and he had to sell matches and newspapers on the street at a tender age. And I think that gave him a lot of empathy for what people felt. And his mother obviously was a great influence on him. She had no choice but to put the children in an orphanage. She couldn't feed them. She couldn't clothe them. And she felt strongly that they needed to be educated. So she did what she thought she needed to do, and she went and visited it as often as she could. So he wasn't abandoned in that sense, but life in an orphanage, I think that imprints on your psyche and in your attitude and everything else about you. And that's why I think he was a big believer in working for social change and social justice and improving the lives of people. He was very admirable, I think. And it's sad that he's disappeared. So it was my husband who first found this story. Was a journalist. He was a filmmaker, and he was doing a show about the Model T. And he interviewed an auto historian who told him about a little bit of the story. And he tucked it away in the back of his head and thought, I've got to learn more about this. This is fascinating. I didn't know anything about it. And so off and on for many years, we worked on it, doing research and finding what we could about him. And sadly, he died before we finished the film. So Gaylen came forward. She had heard about it. She had talked to Michael about it over the years. And she was interested in completing the film. And I welcomed it because I was awash in grief and I didn't know what to do next. And Gaylen's my hero. She came through and helped me get through this and saw it through to completion, and I'm very proud of it. And I know that my husband, Michael Rose, would be absolutely thrilled.
To be clear, there was a trailer that was created. There was no film that was there to be completed. That didn't exist. So what I received was a 10-minute summary of the story. And from there, how to create a film that captured both of these stories, Henry Ford and Sapiro, and make it come alive and be engaging and dramatic. So that was the challenge, and doing it, I think, through different faculties was facets was having the interviews of the scholars and the historians, and then also how we're going to portray Aaron Sapiro, that came through Ben Schenkman, of course. And then another character of the film is really this incredible trove of newspaper archives and headlines, because at the time of the 1920s, this was huge. I mean, the attack against Sapiro was covered all over the world, including in the Jewish news and in Hebrew as well. And then, of course, the trial, and it was amazing. So I wanted to make the news stories as vital and as exciting as the rest of it too, because people have, you don't want to sit and watch a film with just news headlines.
Although you're making me realize that the news articles are also a character in the very earliest part of the film, when we start with the modern headlines with the rollicking music, which is sort of a contrast. And then, I appreciated that.
Well, the headlines, the headlines actually are the beginnings of the headlines in the film are the beginnings in the 1920s. And you saw how pervasive the anti-Semitism was about baseball, about Hollywood, about, keeping Jews out, and all of the libel that existed. And then, of course, it progressed into footage of Nazi movements and torches being burned and crosses being burned. So the progression was there, but the progression, it felt logical to me.
So as you were mentioning, your documentary features actor Ben Schenkman portraying Aaron Sapiro on screen as if he were being interviewed for the film.
We proceeded against Mr. Ford not caring whether we ever collected one single dollar by way of judgment, but determined upon getting Mr. Ford to take the stand.
I think we felt that, I certainly felt that I didn't want anybody characterizing Aaron Sapiro's feelings and his thoughts. Carol and Michael had found an incredible resource of interviews and speeches of Sapiro that were very clear about what he was thinking about the trial, about his life, about growing up, about the times, and nobody really needed to speak for him. So we put together a script that was chronological in a way, going from the beginnings to all the way to the apology at the end. And then I wanted an actor who could best portray Sapiro, and it was sort of a no contest when some friends of mine who producers suggested Ben Schenkman. And then Ben and I did work together on the script as well as how he wanted to be portrayed. He and I both felt we did not want him in a period costume. We wanted him in contemporary dress, the way he spoke to the camera. It was very important to me because the words of Sapiro in 1920s resonated today, and I didn't want people to be distanced, thinking that, this is a story of 100 years ago, when you could listen to Sapiro's words now and relate to them in a contemporary way.
I wonder if you've had any reactions to the portrayal of Sapiro as a more contemporary figure.
There is quite a bit of pushback in the beginning.
Yes.
People who were very uncomfortable. Why isn't he in a costume? Why is he speaking with a jacket and a shirt, a casual? Why is he, they just had to calm down and wait to see the film.
I think it was a little bit surprising when I first saw that. I thought maybe here was an expert talking about it like you would normally see in a documentary. Then I realized, wait, that's him. And I thought it was really cool and an interesting novel choice that I don't recall seeing in other documentaries.
Yeah. I mean, most of the time when they have an actor portraying a character, they do put them in costume, and there is an historical reference. And it is does feel like it's an interviewing the character, and I didn't want that. I wanted it to be very much. I wanted people to gravitate to Sapiro every time he appeared on camera. And little by little, it's very interesting sitting in the audience. In the beginning, there is a hesitation. You can kind of feel, is this Sapiro? Is it not Sapiro? And by the middle of the film, I think, you start to feel the audience react to his wins and his losses in a very immediate sense. And they just forget that it's Ben, which is great.
And the other thing is that there was no footage of Sapiro. So we had to, and very few photographs. I mean, people didn't walk around with their phones taking pictures back then. So we were trying to think of a way that we could bring him to life, that he would be a real, as Gaylen said, speaking in his words and using his wisdom and his feelings to explain what was happening. And it was so powerful. We just felt that we wanted that to really hit people. And I think we succeeded. I hope we did.
Sapiro sued Ford for libel, which in those days only applied to individuals, not to groups. Would a lawsuit have been possible if Ford hadn't attacked Sapiro by name?
I mean, it depended on the state. I think in Michigan, there was no group libel. Group libel at the time was a very, very early concept, and it was state by state. So in Michigan, you could not sue on behalf of a group. It had to be a person. But of course, it was translated very easily that Sapiro was suing on behalf of the Jewish community, besides the cooperatives as well.
So was that a major blunder on the part of Ford?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Big, it was a mistake.
He had published the protocols, and he had put out a lot of anti-Jewish stuff, and he got away with it. So I think he didn't realize that he was libeling a human being, and you couldn't get away with that. He could have gotten away with attacking Jews and spreading whatever it was he wanted to spread. But once you find an individual and you go after that individual, they then have the right to sue. And I think he didn't know that. He just didn't know it.
Or he didn't care. I mean, basically, I think, he looked at Sapiro as just another example of and the result of the international Jewish conspiracy. And if he had been publishing about the international Jewish conspiracy for years, what was the difference of reporting about Sapiro? And he probably didn't care, and he didn't think anybody would sue him. I mean, that was the other issue, and nobody had sued him. I mean, the Jewish community had been negotiating behind the scenes, Louis Marshall and other people, organizations, the ADL, the very beginning ADL, they all tried to mediate and tone down Ford to no avail. So why would he assume that anybody would sue him? And of course, that was quite alarming to the rest of the Jewish community in the East Coast, who were considered themselves as the power of the spokespeople of the Jewish community, that this upstart, this outsider, was going to do a lawsuit and make it worse, perhaps, make more anti-Semitism. That's always the case, is the fear that if you challenge, that you'll create the anti-Semitism, when in fact that doesn't happen. It's already there.
And just to sort of enlighten our audience who hasn't maybe seen the film yet, what was it about Sapiro that irked Ford so much?
Well, Ford believed that he knew what was best for farmers. He wasn't a farmer, but he grew up on a farm, and he'd invented the automobile and other innovations that helped farmers become more efficient. So he really believed that they should listen to him, that they looked up to him, and that he would be the person speaking. And he looked at Sapiro, who had gone to Canada and saw that that's the international Jewish conspiracy at work. And he found the guy he could label as the guy behind this international Jewish conspiracy. So he went after him because he believed, who knows if he really believed these theories or not, but he certainly promulgated them and he was eager to spread them. So he had found a target and he went after him. And he thought it would be easy because we couldn't go too much into it, but they drew out, when Sapiro says that they looked at everything I'd ever said in my life, even things from the orphanage, they dragged it out for years. And they essentially thought that they could break Sapiro. It would cost so much money, and they would just drain him, and he'd go away. And they just picked the wrong guy.
The court case ended in a mistrial, but it was a PR disaster for Ford, who gave up the Dearborn Independent, paid Sapiro's legal fees, and issued an official apology. What should we make of Ford's apology?
The elimination of the Dearborn Independent was probably the biggest part, the biggest success of that trial. And Ford went on, and as you know, I mean, not many people or some people know, but not as many people who should know how much of an anti-Semite Ford really was, because that also got erased.
He not only went on, but he went on to be honored by Hitler himself.
Yeah, and that rolled off him too. I mean, it's not as if he was destroyed at all by the trial. In fact, he will be remembered in many ways for the apology.
What did Sapiro lose as a result of the lawsuit?
We're not really sure. I mean, we didn't know him, but he lost all his clients. And as Professor Loeffler says, sometimes the price of fighting for civil rights is partial justice. And he was very proud of what he'd done. And he felt that he did what he had to do, but he was impoverished. I mean, he went bankrupt. He still worked. He took on cases, but it wasn't quite. He couldn't ever really get reestablished to the same way that he was for so many years. That was unfortunate.
Your film is especially relevant with the acceleration and normalization of anti-Semitism in the U.S. What lessons from the 20s can be applied to today?
So I think it's very important that even as the film it talks about and of course it was specifically about the anti-Semitism in the 1920s, but that language and that vitriol is carried over in every aspect of hate speech, in every lane that you can imagine. And what we worry about, of course, is when hate speech, which is protected by the First Amendment and freedom of speech, carries over and blurs the line and becomes threats, and then of course crimes. And then we have things like Michigan and Pittsburgh and the Toronto and Bondi and all these other experiences that we have. And unfortunately, it's very complicated, isn't it? Because you can't sue for hate speech, and you can't sue for the kinds, it's a different world right now, as we understand at the end of the film, that there is freedom of speech here and the First Amendment. And, in certain countries like Germany, you're not allowed to say, anything without being arrested for the hate speech. But here, that's not true. So I think it's a balance, I think everybody's trying to figure out what can be done to protect people. At the same time, it's very important that people feel that they have, freedom of speech and the First Amendment are very much a part of this country's makeup. So everybody's walking this balance, and it's very difficult and very sensitive. And again, I would say that this is not simply directed at the Jewish community and anti-Semitism. I mean, hate speech goes in many, many different directions and in many motivations, and the targets are, too numerous to say.
Yeah, I think to that point as well, just as social media has taken over where, print media has left off, there are so many kind of, I guess, iterations of something like the Dearborn Independent just floating around online, coming up on people's reels and TikToks and everything like that. It really is a troubling time.
But we hope that people will realize that you can stand up to hate. You can take it on. You can challenge it. And people should feel like you can make a difference. When we stop trying to make social change, when we settle for what we're surrounded by, we get blown away. We have to stand for something, and we hope that people will take from this film the sense that you can make a difference. You can educate people. You can really open people's eyes and let them see what's going on, and you can take a stand. And I think we need more of that right now. We need more of that. And Aaron Sapiro is a model of how to do that.
How can our audience see Sapiro v. Ford?
Well, right now it's on the Jewish Film Festival circuit. So if you're in an urban area or any place where there's a Jewish film festival, we're hoping it'll be there. And we'll see where we go from there. We'd like to, have it broadly seen because we think it's really an important film.
Well, thank you so much, Carol and Gaylen, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.